Hello, folks. Welcome back. This is Chris, and this is an analysis of a news article that appeared on Al Jazeera's website related to the so-called sanctions by Donald Trump against South Africa. I should start out by saying there's no such thing as sanctions against South Africa. Donald Trump issued an executive order in which he suspended foreign aid. That's not a sanction. That's U.S. money, not South Africa's money. And he also offered refugee status to a group of people that he said were being oppressed. So the article is entitled, Are White Afrikaners at Risk in South Africa? Not really, most say. What I can tell you about this article, written by a South African but published in Al Jazeera for the rest of the world to read, is it's incredibly misleading and talk about misinformation and fear. This article is devoid of objectivity. Everyone quoted in this story answers the narrative that the author and the outlet intended for them to reach. As Trump offers to take in Afrikaner refugees, many say right-wing lobbyists have spread misinformation and fear. Really? Well, this should be interesting. Stick with me now as I expose factual errors, misleading statements, and a clear leftist distortion with no attempt at balance in this article from Al Jazeera. Not one effort made to report objectively. Notice there are no opposing views presented in the Al Jazeera article if you get a chance to read it. The outside world reading this would presume that no one in South Africa is racially discriminated against, nor does anyone want out of the country. And the article reads, on February 7th, Donald Trump signed an executive order offering asylum to white Afrikaners and cutting aid to South Africa. The U.S. said that it made the decision after Pretoria signed a law allowing the government to expropriate land in the public interest under exceptional circumstances and over the genocide case South Africa brought against Israel to the International Court of Justice. Well, first off, there was no asylum offer. This is a factual error and already calls into question the entire article. This is a simple matter, one easily discovered by actually reading the executive order. It's about refugee status, which is not the same as asylum. You cannot get asylum from South Africa. You can only get refugee status. You can apply for asylum if you're already legally in the United States. Trump never mentioned white South Africans. He said Afrikaners, a group many believe includes culturally linked coloreds and Indians, not exclusively white. This is a red herring meant to support later claims of white supremacy in this article. Like virtually every single news story or public comment in South Africa on this executive order, Al Jazeera intentionally overlooks the obvious here. They mention expropriation without compensation, and they mention Israel, which is more than many people in South Africa doing, but they fail to mention the most important part of the executive order and the purpose of the sentence, and reinvigorating its relations with Iran to develop commercial, military, and nuclear arrangements. Do you think the United States is going to allow nuclear ambitions for Iran? That's what this is about, plus a number of slights against the United States. Now, the article says the minority Afrikaner community are descendants of mainly Dutch colonial settlers who formalized the segregationist system of apartheid in 1948. Well, that's also factually incorrect. Afrikaners are descendants mainly of three groups, German, Dutch, and French Huguenot, in that order, with less other European Khoi and San DNA. The largest component of the Afrikaner cultural group is German ethnicity. Data show that 73% of privately owned land in South Africa is white-owned. Well, this is a fiction derived either from laziness or intentional distortion of facts provided by the South African government itself. South Africa has 114,223,273 hectares of surface area. 93,056,135 hectares of that is under private ownership in the 2017 land audit. That's 79% of the surface area is owned by private individuals or trust or corporations or other activities in 2017. 21,171,138 hectares is state-owned land. That's 21% of the surface area, making it the second largest group or entity owning land in South Africa. Ownership of the land is not identified by race in the 2017 audit report. You can check for yourself. The next category is actual farm and agricultural holdings and ownership. This is identified by race. 37,078,289 hectares of privately held land is used for agricultural holdings. That's 40% of privately held land. Of that, in 2017, 26,663,144 hectares was reportedly owned by white South Africans. That is 72% of agricultural holdings, which is a portion of private holdings and a lesser portion of total land. Coloreds had 5,371,383 hectares, 15% of the agricultural holdings, which far outranks their percentage population, just like whites. Indians, with 1% of the population, had 2,031,790 hectares of land in agriculture. And black South Africans purportedly had just 1,314,873 hectares of land in agriculture. White South Africans owned at least 29% of total privately held land for agriculture, or 23% of total land in South Africa. Any claim beyond that is false. This 72% is fiction because it's not 72% of the land in South Africa. It's not even 72% of privately held land. It's just 29% of privately held land, 23% of total land for agriculture. That's what they're using for. The figure is no doubt lower today, 7 years later, but it's not 72%, and it hasn't been. Additionally, the Inganyama Trust, under the direction of the Zulu King, is 2.8 million hectares. That's 1/3 larger than the total farmland hectares owned by all black South Africans in 2017. That 1.3 million plus 2.8 million, that's significantly higher. Now, land ownership has significantly changed since the report was released 7 years ago, and we have no information on updates because there's no reliable data because the government has failed to do an updated audit. Now, the author will quibble here in the article. Musk would have allowed the state to expropriate 30% of his company in order to do business here. They quote Willem Petzer. And the author says South African legislation requires companies operating in the country to be 30% black-owned to redress past inequalities. Past inequality does not change the fact that under existing law, Musk would be required to divest 30%. Now, this is a typical leftist canard employed here, namely whataboutism. So because past inequities, it's fair to make a foreign direct investor divest 30% of their equity. No, it's not. That's just nonsense. And it is even germane to this article. Some experts said the threshold for someone to gain refugee status in the U.S. is not met by Afrikaner landowners. So who are these experts? They're not identified in the article. Refugee status is determined by the United States, not by some experts. The U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act defines a refugee as someone unable or unwilling to return to their home country due to the well-founded fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. That's correct, mostly. It's the well-founded fear, but it's also actual persecution. That is a threshold met by many South Africans. So that's not even germane here. They're trying to use facts to support their unsupported argument that South Africans don't qualify for refugee status. Comical. And this is where it gets more interesting, where they dredge up more people to give opinions that are one-sided. Meanwhile, beyond the rally, most white South Africans seem uninterested in seeking asylum. Well, of course they are, because we're not offering asylum. The United States is offering refugee status. Get your facts correct. Many acknowledge they experience privilege, not persecution, in a democratic South Africa. Beyond the rally. So a handful of Tux students at the University of Pretoria, that's not even remotely representative of Afrikaners. For that matter, nor is my audience, which includes a lot of people that want to leave, but that's not representative of all Afrikaners. That's just a segment who've watched my content. Mumumele Metsiende, a black student at the university, said she doesn't know anyone who would leave South Africa for the U.S. Well, I do not imagine Tux students would know many interested in leaving, what with living in their university bubble. She said, I don't think any Afrikaners would really move to the U.S. I don't think this Trump thing is real. Well, that's an opinion, nothing more, and it comes from a university student who has limited experience in life. Now, she did acknowledge ongoing challenges regarding racial integration, but emphasized growing acceptance amongst communities. Folks, integration is not the subject at hand. Oppression is the issue. But now things get nasty in this article with the subheading, White Supremacists in Suits and Ties. Wow, where's that coming from? Well, that's actually libel. There's no evidence offered in this article. It's simply race-hustling opinion. Once regarded as a fringe organization, AfriForum calls itself the largest civil rights body in the Southern Hemisphere. However, a U.S. civil society group, the Southern Poverty Law Center, has called AfriForum's leaders white supremacists in suits and ties. Now, folks, the Southern Poverty Law Center has little to no credibility when it comes to race relations, let alone knowledge of South African civil society actors. Trump's new unfounded claims that white South Africans are under siege. Again, opinion, nothing more. 142 racially discriminatory laws alone make Trump's claims well-founded about refugee status. The reality is that what people describe as farm murders count for usually less than 1% of all murders in the entire country every year. Folks, this is a distraction tactic. Trump doesn't even mention farm murders in the executive order and hasn't talked about that since 2018. This is an effort to distort the conversation. It has nothing to do with farm murders. South African author Max de Prieur says that AfriForum frequently employs scare tactics to incite fear among Afrikaners regarding potential land seizures. He believes its strategy exploits vulnerable populations rather than addressing broader societal issues. Well, I'm sure Max de Prieur does believe that. Doesn't make it right. Interesting how they quote leftists. And this is a quote from Max de Prieur on May 10th of 2024. Growing Trump-like populism with its strong authoritarian ethno-nationalist, hyper-capitalist, and intolerant streak is the greatest threat to Western civilization. The people who stand against this, who advocate for a softer, more empathetic and compassionate society, are the salvation. Communist, socialist. In any case, it's hardly an objective observer. And in the interest of objectivity and balance, I will give the opposite side. Imagine this. This is a quote from a letter of 4 Republican congressmen sent to President Trump, in which he calls, remember, he just said he called Trump ethno-nationalist, hyper-capitalist, and intolerant streak. There's nothing wrong with capitalism. But this is what the Republican congressman said about the South African ANC government. Also not objective. The ethno-nationalist gangster regime in Pretoria, working to be the undisputed successor to Mao's destructive land reform policies, has for years attempted to expropriate land from native South Africans without compensation. Now, that is hardly objective either. Max de Preur is not objective, and neither are those Republican congressmen. Additionally, according to a 2017 land audit, black people who make up more than 80% of the country's population own only 4% of the land. That's false. That's false. I've proven that with the stats already. Against this backdrop, Ramaphosa has defended the Expropriation Act, insisting that it does not amount to land confiscation, but creates a framework for fair and lawful redistribution. It allows authorities to take land in the public interest without compensation in only exceptional circumstances, like when the area is abandoned. That is false. Read the act as it's written. It's not limited to that. It leaves a broad, wide road for them to drive through and expropriate whatever they want. It's also unnecessary. Section 25 of the South African Constitution allows for expropriation with compensation. Under this program, the South African government has purchased 3.9 million hectares of land. 3.9 million hectares of land. That's a little over 2% of the total surface area of South Africa, about 2.8%. What have they done with it? Why do they need to expropriate without compensation? You're greedy? Malema dismissed fears of international sanctions, saying that he had never threatened white South Africans. Well, folks, that's false. Julius Malema has threatened whites over and over and over again with hyperbole and direct threats. It instead blamed Trump's sanctions on South Africa's government, saying it refused to protect white Afrikaners and further antagonize the U.S. through its foreign policy positions. Well, that's false. Trump did not impose any sanctions on South Africa. How hard is this for the journalists to understand, for Al Jazeera to understand? There are no sanctions. You're not entitled to our money. We didn't embargo trade. We didn't put travel restrictions. We didn't block your financial transactions. The United States did none of that. We simply stopped giving you handouts. That's not a sanction. That's an internal decision for America. So the author says that Trump's executive order against South Africa went beyond sanctioning the country for its Expropriation Act and included land-basing South Africa's position against Israel. That's true. But then the author quotes a senior fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogues, Tembisa Fakuda, who tells the full story. Because what the author just said is dishonest. Expropriation without compensation and the ICJ are not the only grievance listed. The senior fellow quoted says, "We know that comments following executive order did mention the ICJ case against Israel and South Africa's relations with Iran. In fact, it did." And Tembisa Fakuda is being honest, but the author is not being honest, and this comes at the end of the article. Reinvigorating its relations with Iran to develop commercial, military, and nuclear arrangements. That is what's going on here. Plus a whole host of other insults and slights against the United States, which they're not recognizing, but they're there. And I've run through this in previous videos. The bottom line is this article is disingenuous, and it relies on an unbalanced position to interview people who give their opinions as Tufts University students, as Max de Preur, people who are privileged, people who have a life of luxury, people who are apparently not affected by events. A balanced article would have went and talked to someone who said they do want to leave and get their view on why they want to leave and what their perception is. But that's not what you find in the media. You find this garbage. And that's what it is, garbage. An unbalanced, biased, bigoted propaganda article that doesn't take the facts into account. What say you, folks? You think this is a good article? Or do you think my analysis is on the money? Cheers.